People to come together in partnerships that are meaningful and collaborative, often across divides and are far too extreme in our students' communities. And we need to do those partnerships in a way that is sustainable and that is focused on improving the lives of our most needy youth, neighborhoods, and communities. And so, as I said, partnerships is at the key of what we do. And so to welcome you today are some of our key partners here at Castlemont High School. I'd love to introduce you to the principal and students of Castlemont High.
I would like to welcome you guys to Castlemont. I am Teresa Flores, a student at East Oakland School of Arts.
Yes. And I'm John Lynch. I lead the 9th grade academy here at Castlemont. So we want to just thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to have this emerging partnership with Mills. And also really profoundly honored to have Dr. Claude Steele here to talk about stereotype threat today. And so it's interesting because Castlemont is situated in Deep East Oakland, which is a neighborhood that has a lot of stereotypes, right? There are a lot of stereotypes about the Deep East, there are a lot of stereotypes about Castlemont. And so I feel like it's really important that Dr. Steele is here today to talk about the structures that create stereotypes and the impact that stereotypes have on young people at Castlemont and who live in the Deep East, and the burden that they carry based on those stereotypes, and that he's able to kind of name that and to create an understanding that that's structural, it's oppressive, and it's racist, and it gives our kids the ability to be that much freer every single day. So I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Steele, for being here, and on behalf of the Castlemont school community, we want to give you a Castlemont shirt and welcome you to our Castlemont family. So Castlemont. He is officially been knighted.
Then we want to really transition from that to a dialogue and a conversation with all of you here. So we're hoping to be able to move away from the kind of static Q&A and really have a dialogue amongst all the amazing educators that I know are here. This is actually a really pretty profound event to have this many teachers from around the Bay together to talk about these ideas. So we really want to open that up to a conversation. And then we will move that conversation to a reception that's in room 204 over in Castlemont. And Dr. Steele will be available to sign books. If you aren't able to buy a book, we also have book plates made. And you can have him sign those, and you can put those in his book when you're able to get a copy of that, or if you already have one at home. And I know that there's groups of teachers here who already have his books. I know that a group of people from Jordan High School in San Francisco were reading his work last year. So I don't think we sold any books to them, but they may want to get their little book thing signed. So with no more time wasted, I'd like to pass this over to Dr. Sabrina Zerkel, who's going to introduce Dr. Steele.
All right, Sabrina.
Thank you. What a pleasure and a wonderful opportunity this is. I've known Claude for 25 years. I've known him most of my adult life. And one of the exciting things, first let me tell you a little bit about Claude for those of you who don't know. So Claude's had a very illustrious career at a number of different universities. He's been a professor at a number of universities, most recently at Stanford. After that, he became the director of the Center for the Advanced Study of the Behavioral Sciences. He became provost at Columbia University, and just this past September returned to Stanford to be the dean of the School of Education there. And what's been exciting in all of those institutions and the ones things in before that is that at every institution that Claude goes to, he is instrumental in opening the doors much, much wider to women, to people of color, to all kinds of people for whom those institutions have not been open to in the past. And I've watched it happen time and again in the Stanford Psychology Department, at the Center for the Advanced Studies, and I'm sure it'll happen again in the School of Education. One of the exciting things about having known Claude all this time is I've watched the birth of this idea of stereotype threat. And I've watched it be born and sort of go out into the world and have this tremendous impact that it's had. Some of you here may not know that this idea has been instrumental in taking on what we might call the testing industrial complex, to taking on the College Board and the way that SATs and SAT scores sort of determine our lives. And this was so fascinating to watch us move from one person's idea to really sort of taking on these very important large industries. And helping us rethink what equal opportunity means and really carefully do that. Claude's probably primary identification as an academic, I don't think I'm wrong in saying, is that as a social psychologist. And when I was in graduate school, which is when I met Claude, and I don't think we would disagree, that in the mid-'80s, it was very clear within social psychology and within a number of probably other areas within psychology too, that basic research and applied research were separate entities, and one was clearly better than the other. Yeah. Basic research was where you developed an idea, and applied research was where you took somebody else's idea and applied it in the field. And it was very clear that you wanted to be a group where you were making your own ideas. And Claude, I've watched also this transformation in our field, which is largely, I wouldn't want to blame it all on Claude, but has been a small group of people within social psychology who really broke down those barriers and really have said that this basic applied split is nonsense, and that what's really important is ideas that actually have some real world impact. It's not just ideas for ideas' sake, but ideas that make a difference out there in the world. So on one hand, he's transformed a field. On another, he's transformed an industry. On another, he's transforming institutions. And at the same time that he's doing all of that, he's also mentoring scores of people, entire groups of people in a number of different fields, not just in psychology. And I include myself in that group. I wasn't his student, but at various points throughout my career, he's thrown me lifelines when I needed them, and he's thrown many other people lifelines when they needed them, so that he's been a very instrumental person in making a difference in a lot of ways. So this is a very exciting opportunity. I know he's very pleased to come here and speak at Castlemont High School and have this opportunity to speak in a venue that's not just at an institution behind the gates, but actually out here in the field, and to speak to teachers and students as well as faculty. So, without further ado, we welcome Claude Steele.
I'm going to try to make it with this one. I saw it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sabrina, for that wonderful, meaningful introduction. You have to know me for 25 minutes for that introduction to come up with that introduction, so I really appreciate it. It's a real pleasure for I and Dorothy to be here. We've been away, and this is kind of spotty, right? If I really put it up my mouth, it will work. Let's try it. We'll see what happens. It's a real pleasure for us to be here. We're longtime Californians and West Coast people, and we've been away for a couple of years, and now we're back. We're very happy to be back, and it's a great opportunity for us to come over here and meet you guys and talk to you, just as a way of sort of affirming our coming back and getting into the local community again. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be here and see you guys. My mission is really to sort of give an overview of the research that Sabrina referred to that's been going on for just about as long as I've known her, for about 25 years. It deals with how stereotypes affect us, how stereotypes about our age, our race, our gender, our region of the country, all these things, how they affect our functioning, our intellectual functioning, our relationships with each other, even our athletic performance in some instances. So that is the general topic of the course. The work is most frequently known under the label stereotype threat, sometimes social identity threat. As I go along, there are kind of two subtexts that I would like to kind of underscore at the outset and draw your attention to. One is I think this research demonstrates how important the social context is to our intellectual functioning. I think in everyday life, in our lay thinking about things, we tend to think of intellectual functioning, intelligence, as something that's irrepressible and difficult to be modified. We assume, for example, that you can give a test to a person in a 3-hour period of time, and that you can use that test as such a good measure of their intellectual capacities that you can use their score on that test and allocate opportunities for the rest of their lives. So we have a disproportionate, incredible faith in this, and underlying that is an ideology that something like intellectual functioning is very stable and very domain general and all these kinds of things. And I hope that one of the subtexts of the talk will be to modify your sense of that, to see some of the things that really shape that, and then shape that in all of our own functioning. Another theme I want to underscore at this point is one that Sabrina referred to, and that is the connection between trying to just plain solve a problem, doing research that tries to understand a basic problem, and how that effort can lead to very basic understandings about how human beings function. I want to offer this as kind of if any of you are going into research careers, I want to offer it to you as a real strategy, because I think the payoff is very high. I never had a lot of success when I tried first to think of a great theory and then go test it. I've had the most fun and the most success by trying to solve a real problem that I cared about, and then trying to just develop the understandings you need to solve the problem. So I offer it as that kind of an example. I'll begin by first, giving you the problem that this work started with. Then I'll talk a little bit about the theory that we think explains this problem, a few demonstrations, and then I'm going to try as fast as I can to get to ideas about remedy. What can you do to improve this and to overcome this problem, both as individuals and as institutions? The problem. Well, I became aware of it when I moved to the University of Michigan from the University of Washington. This is some 25 years ago, and was put on a minority students recruitment and retention committee. And on the first day of that committee's meeting, I sat down and saw a pattern of data. And what the data did was to graph out the grade point averages, the cumulative grade point averages that students at the University of Michigan had as a function of the level of SAT score or ACT that they had when they came to Michigan. So you get their cumulative grade average graphed out as a function of the SAT score, let's say, that they had when they got to Michigan. And what you see is generally that kids who come in with higher SAT scores get higher cumulative grades while they're at Michigan. Not a lot higher. It's really important to understand that, for example, the SAT captures, that is, it measures only about 18% of the factors that go into freshman grades, that determine freshman grades. And it measures an even smaller percentage of the things that determine sophomore grades, and then smaller for junior grades, and graduation rates, and so on. It's a number, and therefore we take it very seriously, and we have this, as I say, this underlying ideology about the stability and the importance of the construct that it measures, intelligence. But actually it doesn't capture very much of what it takes to be a good student, for example. We can come back to that later. I'll go off forever talking about that, so please don't be shy to ask me. So that was one factor, but the other factor was that presented a line for the African American students separately from the line for other students at the University of Michigan. And what was really immediately obvious was that at every level of SAT score that students came in with, African American students were getting lower grades than other students at Michigan. And that was very surprising to me. If you told me that black students at Michigan had somewhat lower grade averages than whites at Michigan, I wouldn't have been too surprised, because among the students, race is still a factor that affects the kind of educational opportunities you have in life. And so among us, a group of students that are strong enough to do well at the University of Michigan, you might assume that black students in that group, as a group, may have had less preparation for college work as other students, and that would manifest itself as somewhat lower grades. And so I wouldn't have been surprised by an average difference like that. But the important thing to realize here is that even when you equate people for preparation for college work as measured by an SAT score, even at the very high levels, African American students were getting lower grades than white students. Why would that be? If you've got two kids with 1550 SAT scores, and black kids with those scores are consistently getting lower grades than other students with those scores? That was the puzzle. We quickly found out that the same exact thing was true for women in the STEM fields, in science, technology, engineering, math. We found that the same thing was true, especially in the more advanced courses, that women with the same entry SAT scores were getting lower grades in those courses than men were getting. And then we found that this was not only true at the University of Michigan, but it was true everywhere. It was true in junior high school, it was true at Harvard Medical School, at Columbia Law School, everywhere we looked, for groups whose intellectual abilities were negatively stereotyped in the broader society, would, at some subsequent level of schooling, would underperform in relation to groups whose intellectual abilities were not negatively stereotyped in the society, even though they had the same preparation, even though they had the same skill level coming into that situation. There would be this kind of underperformance. And as I say, it wasn't just in one or few instances, it was absolutely lawful throughout American society. So that's really what launched this research, is trying to understand that problem. How on earth could this happen? What's behind it? Okay. Now for the explanation. I'll save you 10, 15 years of ambling around in the darkness looking for some account of this phenomenon. I'll give you what our best account is. And it begins with a simple idea of social identity. And by that, I just mean it's the part of our personal identity, that comes from our group, our membership in groups, and our membership in certain social categories. That is all I mean by social identity. It's important to realize we have tons of them. Our age, our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our political affiliation, our mental health status, our physical health status, our region of the country we come from, all of these things qualify as social identity. Some people argue that there's no two people on earth who have the same combination of social identities, and that in part our individuality may come from that mix, our particular mix of social identities. The important question for us is what makes a social identity important to us? Important in the sense of it's having an impact on how we function as individuals. What makes that important for us? And our answer is a very simple answer, and with a big term. It's the contingencies that are tied to having that identity. It's the things you have to deal with in particular situations because you have an identity. That's what makes an identity important to you. If you don't have to deal with anything because you've got a given characteristic, it will never rise to the level of being a social identity. Something that shapes your experience, that shapes your life, the choices you make, the places you choose to live your life, all those sorts of things. I begin the book with an attempt to give you a personal story of exactly that, contingencies tied to a social identity. I asked myself the question, when's the first time I realized I was black? When did I realize that? And to the best of my memory, it was coming home from grade school, and probably about the 3rd grade, walking along with all the other kids in my school, all of us were black kids, and we're thinking about the summer stretched out in front of us, and we're talking about maybe going swimming, and then somebody says, well, you know, we can only go to the swimming pool, which was the area pool just outside our neighborhood. We could only go to that swimming pool on Wednesday afternoons. And I can just remember thinking, well, who is we, and why is it that we can only go to the pool except on Wednesday afternoons? And it was really a lot of questions were opened up by this comment. And there weren't answers. There were just a lot of questions. What does that mean? And who are we? And who are they? And who can control this? And what's it about? These were just the normal garden variety segregations of that era. Anybody African American remembers that era, 50s, 60s. This was in Chicago, where things were still segregated. I next found out we couldn't go to the roller rink except on Thursday nights. And you know, I had this sense we could be regular people, but we could only be regular people in the middle of the week. And you just had all these little things you had to learn. That's what I mean by contingencies tied to a social identity that make an identity important to you in the sense of it's having an impact on you. You know, if I'd grown up in Lagos, Nigeria, being black would probably not have led to a significant social identity. I wouldn't have a sense of myself that was rooted in that, because everybody's black there. That society is organized in ways so that there aren't real things that you have to deal with because you're black, since everybody is black. And you just don't think of that as a social identity. But in our society, where there were these segregations and where there are these continued contingencies tied to race, you have to think about it. I guess that's the one thing I really want to emphasize. As a psychologist, we tend to decontextualize the person. So we can think of things as like identities, like my gender identity or my sexual identity. We can think of those things as sort of independent things that are just inside my head. And they could be strong or they could be weak as a function of kind of how I wanted them to be. And I don't want to suggest we have no control over our identities, but I want to point to the more basic fact, which is that the identities we get are rooted in reality. They're rooted in the way our society is organized around those identities. The way the Chicagoland of the 1950s and 60s was organized around race, with schools, de facto school segregation, housing segregation, job discrimination, all of those things that were characteristic of that era and how it was organized meant that there were a lot of contingencies tied around race, and that made race very important. And I think when people ask about a post-Obama era, that's the first place I go to get an answer. How many of those contingencies have changed? Are there still contingencies tied to it? As long as there are contingencies tied to it, I think that becomes a significant identity that is significant not only in the sense that, well, it's a sense that I have to deal with, in the sense that a person has to deal with because of the contingencies tied to it.
I'm the Dean of the School of Education at Mills College, and I want to join everybody in welcoming you. This is a great day. This is our School of Education faculty for the last year has had this dream of starting the Center for Urban Schools and Partnerships, and we're so delighted that Claude Steele was here to help us open this center, celebrate the opening of the center, and also inaugurate this speaker series, which we'll tell you more about in a minute. So thank you, Claude, and thank all of you here for being a part of this exciting event. And we hope that Claude's talk will stimulate important dialogue among us. As Ingrid was saying, that the idea behind the center is to break down some of the barriers and to ignite conversation in the community between Mills College faculty and students and the the students and teachers and administrators and people in the community who we want to work with to improve the lives and education of children. And so to start us off in this conversation, to take these provocative thoughts that we had from Dr. Steele, we have two guests that I want to quickly introduce. And they're acting like yes, very, very nice. So the two people who will give us some thoughts about how to take these ideas and think about them in terms of the lives of teachers and students and administrators here at Castlemont and in Oakland are first Betsy Steele, who is right here at the table, who's principal of Castlemont's Leadership Prep Academy. She's currently a Mills doctoral student, so we can claim her. Yay, Betsy! In a range of capacities, from a classroom teacher to reading specialist, and now to this terrific principal who has a great reputation here at Castlemont. To her left is our second respondent, Leona Kwan, who is in the 9th grade prep academy and an ethnic studies teacher. She just graduated from the Mills Credential Program last year, landed her dream job here at Mills, and here at Castlemont, I'm sorry, is working on her master's degree at Mills, and we're so delighted to have both of them respond. Their responses will lead to all of our conversation, because part of this idea is to have a dialogue among all of us.
First of all, I want to welcome everybody to our house here at Castlemont. We're so happy to have you here. And I am so pleased to have the opportunity to respond or reflect on a couple of thoughts from Dr. Steele. It's kind of strange for me because my last name is Steele as well. So, but this is really kind of an interesting experience. There are a couple of things that I would like to respond to with regards to stereotype threat. We have a clear definition of what it is. I would like to respond to remedies for dealing with it. Remedies for administrators, remedies for teachers and counselors, and all of those who are young students here in high school and in urban centers. A couple of things stood out for me. Relationships and expectations for our students. Entry points for moving in and attacking those stereotype threats. So what I would like to do is share a couple of stories or a couple of experiences that I'm working with my students and staff and the community here. When we talk about remedies for the environment, when we talk about relationships with the kids, it's a matter of moving in and having them know that you believe in them. We have to talk to the kids, get to know the students, talk with them, and relate to them from the standpoint that they are important and that they do matter. And when you build a relationship with students that they do matter, then it lessens the stress that is put upon that CST test that's coming up, that CST score that you're shooting for. So a story around that whole CST piece, that testing piece. At the beginning of the school year, started working with my staff last year in our professional developments. And the whole idea was, okay, where do we want to take the children this year with regards to their learning and their CST? We came up with a number, and looked at how we could reach that score, the improvement on that score. We went back to the students, worked with the students, and explained to them how we could reach that score. So we all made an investment together. And by making that investment together, then the students were clear on what we had to do. The staff was clear on what we had to do. And we could continue to go back as we were moving toward that CSG, go back and reflect on where we were and where we were going. So as a result of that, building that relationship of trust, we were actually able to meet our projected improvement score on that CST. So the students, as a result of that, were able to see that a test score or whatever was not bigger than them. That removed that frustration that Dr. Steele was talking about on that test. So that's one story that I wanted to share with you. Another story that I'd like to share with you is the fact that in building those relationships, we really have to come up with a way to give our students voice. In the midst of all the situations, the contingencies, if we can come up with a way to give them that voice, then they will be able to step beyond those stereotype threats and deal with them and put those in context. They don't have a tag for it or a label for it. But they do know when you know that they can be successful and that they can achieve. We focused on writing for the last year. And we went into a writing project, and my students in general believe that they're not good writers. So we established a writing room. It's an after-school program where students came and they would write. They would write about who they are and where they came from, and what they're doing, their lives on a daily basis. After we finished the project, we decided that we would put together an anthology of their writing. As the kids were doing the writing individually, they could see the power in their writing, but when they could see it collectively, it took them to a whole other level. They actually became authors. They put it together, put it to a publisher. The Oakland Tribune picked it up. It came out, were interviewed by the Oakland Tribune. The anthology now is will be out today or tomorrow. We're doing a book signing at Barnes & Noble next weekend on the 19th. And we submitted it to Maya Angelou to read the anthology. And she was very moved by it, and she has written the foreword for the anthology. So all of that began as a result of giving our students voice, letting them know, yes, you can write. So going in and attacking the context of the situation and moving our students in with that level of faith is really what it's all about. With regards to changing the environment, again, professional development is such a wonderful tool for working with our teachers. We kicked off the year by doing a community walk. We absolutely have to get to know who our students are in order for us to relate to them, in order for us to respect them. Because when we're talking about remedies, these are just not, they're just not another student. It's not just another test score. These are students' lives that are affected. And the bottom line is, it is our responsibility to become culturally proficient leaders, attacking those stereotype threats in order for us to see our students become successful. So those are the things that resonated with me as Dr. Steele, as I was relating to his study. And I think that's about it.
Hi folks, I know it's getting late, people probably as hungry as I am right now, so it's pretty short. My name is Leona Kwan. I am a 9th grade ethnic studies teacher here at Castlemont at the Freshman Prep Academy. So, as I was introduced by Dean Schultz, this is my first year. I completed my credential last year at Mills, so everything I'm saying is coming from the perspective of a brand new teacher who's taught for 10 weeks. So, remember that. So a little bit more about where I'm coming from. Teaching, getting this position as an ethnic studies teacher, I mean, it pretty much was my dream job. To be able to do this, teach in a community of color, teach them the history of their people. I mean, it's such an amazing opportunity, and it's incredible that this is a required class for all of the 9th graders here at Castlemont High School. So, I think there's so many reasons why ethnic studies is such an incredibly important and transformational course of study for young people. And I would say, let's see, one of the best things about it, and something I've experienced over and over, is how the students respond when you, as a position of power, allow them to have a space where they can actually even identify and share the times they've experienced stereotypes and the fact that the times that they've just simply experienced racism. To have a space for that to happen, and for them to have someone, as part of the institution, me, a teacher, validate those experiences, I think is a really powerful thing and has allowed me to build a lot of very strong relationships with my students in these 10 weeks that we've had so far. I also think that the first step to really heal from oppression and heal from the racism that our students experiences is to even have that venue to share. As Dr. Steele was saying, I really enjoyed the story about the Yale kids who saw the other African American student sharing his story and how much that impacted him in a positive way, even though he is sharing, I don't belong in this place, you know, it just doesn't seem like the place for me, I don't know any of these people. Just knowing that another person is going through that with you, having that critical mass, is incredibly, incredibly important. Last year when I was a student teaching at a world history class in Hayward, our last unit was on race, and so many students, I couldn't believe the number of them who didn't realize that everyone was going through the same thing that they were. So giving a space for that in a classroom, I think, is a really powerful thing. So that's been a really beautiful experience for me. Also, obviously, heartbreaking at times, but really amazing to have that feeling of community and solidarity among my students as we're kicking off the year. I also think the last thing about ethnic studies, hello. I think the discipline is so important for students who already feel so incredibly marginalized by society, for them to understand the historical context of where all of those feelings are coming from, and to be able to articulate those in an academic setting. That is incredibly powerful too. Really, really important for them. So it's wonderful to watch them go through that. Because let's all face it, like watching, they get this too. If you see someone, and this is very often in ethnic studies, you see people overcoming adversity, seeing their struggle, seeing their resistance. And that entire process, it is absolutely impressive, rather than someone coming from a position of privilege, achieving something, going to Harvard. Yes, of course that's impressive, but like, why did 200 million Americans go watch The Blind Side? It was not because a rich white kid was going off to play in the NBA. So all these stories of diversity, and I think it's really important for our students to see that, see where our people are coming from, what we've experienced, and come today. And then the last thing I'd just like to talk about is the implications as educators. I really think that when you even acknowledge the huge breadth of stereotypes that students in Oakland experience, students of color, that is one way to express like true compassion and true authentic care of your students, to just simply validate that, that's all. The next thing, as educators, I think we have to be incredibly intentional about how we're teaching. How are our personal, we first have to recognize that we all hold stereotypes. There's no way you don't hold stereotypes when you've grown up in this society. So A, just recognize that you have those, and B, really consider how they inform your practice as a teacher. And I mean, I'll share a personal story of my own. I noticed at some point in the year when I kind of stopped using some of my equity cards, where you write down all the kids' names on a piece of paper and draw them. For a couple of days, I wasn't using them. And then I noticed that I was calling on, when calling the students to read, I was calling on the majority African American students and not my Latino kids. And when I realized that, I was just like, oh, like, those are my stereotypes coming out, and I don't even know if that is. So even me knowing these students, knowing their language ability, me not calling on them because I'm feeling like I don't want them to be put on the spot, if they don't feel totally comfortable. Am I calling on the African American students because a lot of them have a really loud reading voice? Like, I don't know where all of like the decision making is happening up here, but I did have to stop and examine that. And I was like, okay, back to the equity sticks. This is not good. And that's just really one example of why it's so important as educators, and this is very Mills, so anyone watching Mills, this is going to be like, this is very old hat. But that's why it's so important for educators to take this inquiry stance and always have this openness to reflect on your practice, even the things, the choices, these simple choices that you're making every single day. And how am I putting my stereotypes on my students? How am I reinforcing stereotypes? So many ways that can be done in the classroom. So I think I'll just leave you with that. And thank you so much for coming here. It's kind of crazy to see a bunch of adults in here and not my freshmen. I really appreciate everyone taking the time, and thank you, Dr. Steele.
So we'd like to broaden the conversation to include all of you right now. And as Ingrid was saying, encourage you to make this a dialogue that includes questions we know that you have for Dr. Steele, but for the panelists as well. We also encourage you to follow the panelists in relating your own experiences where you've taken some of these ideas and put them into practice. Just one quick comment is it was so exciting to hear both the talk and the panelists, so thank you all, because it really enacted exactly what Dr. Steele was saying in terms of taking a hunch, taking a problem to be solved, turning it into an experiment and an idea, that in turn becoming a theory, stereotype that we all know, and then coming back again to practice and hearing exactly how it's shaped the kind of teaching and leading practice that we see here at Castlemont. And so that kind of recursivity is exactly the kind of research and practice that we're talking about, and exactly the kind of work through partnerships that we hope to accomplish in the center that's just beginning today. So please, we invite your questions, we invite your reflections, your comments, your inquiry, all in the spirit of the fabulous talk and the fabulous panelists. Ingrid, as she said, will
John
walk around, and John,
we have a question
with microphones.
Thank you, Dr. Steele. So help me understand, you gave a very, very good, I get stereotype right now. So how do I, as someone that is very important for me as an educator, to have my bias about black boys and things like that, right? And so stereotype threat, how do I make sure that when I'm teaching other students that it doesn't become like this kumbaya thing where it's like, oh, looky, we all have issues. How do I still let them know that, yes, we do, but for some of us it's even greater. You know what I'm saying? Because you just get, you talk about in your book about make sure you create a safe place, and this does create a safety, but I don't want you to forget how important it is that for some of us, it's a, it's a bigger issue.
I think that's a good question. And I don't want to claim to have an answer for every thing. I do think, I think about this in relation to parenting as almost analogous to education, to what teachers do with students and so on. And I don't have a sharp, single answer. I think as a parent and as an advisor of students and as a trainer of students and a teacher, I try to create a safe space, a sense of safety. But at the same time, you really want that narrative that you're working on, that you're hoping that they get. You're wanting that narrative to be realistic and not overwhelmingly bad, because that's easy to do. It's easy to fall into that. And not overwhelmingly good, in the sense that, boy, you don't have anything where you have kind of a false consciousness idea. So, we're somewhere working in between those two things, and I think what we want to do is try to be realistic, but try to be as hopeful as we can. And I think maybe the hopefulness is what we haven't stressed as much. That what they need is hope. They understand the world may not be completely fair, that it's got unjust hierarchies, that it's got unjust traditions, traditions and a troubling history, and they understand those things, but we don't want them to add up to signal that there's nothing they can do. And it's so easy to, in bringing them to that fundamental awareness, it's so easy to do that. I think we need to work explicitly on finding the hope and the bright light at the end of the tunnel as we talk to them, so that we empower them.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Steele. I have a question about the SAT. So on SAT, students are supposed to select race and gender. I'm pretty sure it's optional. But do you think that SAT scores would go up in subjective groups if that was not on SAT at all? Like you talked about how different tests, you had different groups of test takers, and you had different scenarios going on, and if that wasn't on SAT, do you think students' scores would go up and people aren't generalized? They wouldn't have to select, oh, I'm an African American, so even in their mind, if they're test taking, if they're not thinking about it, maybe they're not doing their best because compared to everybody else who's taking tests in the room, they just don't think that they do all this because of their race or gender.
Yeah, that's a great question. The educational testing service, the people who bring us the SAT and the GRE and probably the NCATs and so on, Brian understand that's tested using admissions. They had put this to test, and the way they did it was not to eliminate reporting of gender, but to put it at the end of the test after you've taken the test. So now you're not. And they found that it has quite a substantial effect on women's performance. I would have been dubious that they would have found too much of an effect. And the reason I would have been dubious is because these tests are such high-stakes tests. There's so much pressure on the person already that it's difficult to think that something as minor as that could really alleviate all the stereotype pressure and other pressures that come to bear on that test. So I would have been dubious, but they did find an effect. somebody calculated a statistic that if they did that, something like 5,000 more women every year would pass the advanced placement exam in math. Just ask you to record your gender at the end of the test after it's over, as opposed to at the front of the test.
Wow.
So I think it makes a difference. Getting them to institute this, maybe they have to some degree. I just don't know what they've actually done with that evidence. It seems so easy to me that I don't see why they just don't do that. But I'm not them, so I don't know really what they've done. But you've got a good hunch there.
Other questions or comments or ideas? You can say it louder.
My question, I know that your research is mostly about stereotype threat at a very high level. Students have invested in their results and are very conscientious. But I'm wondering about your thoughts on diversity and critical mass within, for example, a high school level, and whether diversity, racial diversity in particular, mitigates stereotype threats for those students who may not perform at the highest level, but whether diversity kind of makes them feel less of a token and might in fact allow them to perform better academically.
I think the quick answer is yes. I think diversity is like critical mass. You know, it's a signal to you that you're in a world where your particular identity is not going to be likely to be so troublesome. You know, I go to New York City, and there are so many identities there that I don't really worry to the same degree that my particular identity is going to be a problem. I just don't. It doesn't cue that up as much as it might be if I went to some small town where I really would have to be worried about that, or I would worry about that. So I think in schools, diversity has the same kind of an effect. It can relax kids from feeling like that is going to be a source of trouble for them. And that relaxation, you know, I think one thing we have to appreciate, kids really do want to learn and succeed in school. They really do want that. And if they get that opportunity, they'll just fall into it. And we don't have to, sometimes I think we have the sense that we have to make them or really motivate them. I think sometimes it's a matter of getting these other pressures out of the way and giving them the opportunity to be interested in things that they would just that they normally find interesting.